Well, thanks for joining us for today's forum on the topic of the Friends Meeting of Austin COVID Relief Fund, um, uh, which has been administered by the Peace and Social Concerns Committee, currently myself and Bach, who's there at the meeting. Today we'll talk a little bit about the history of the fund, which was started in 2020 in, I think, April. Our first gift was in May. We'll talk a little bit about recipients of the fund over the past 2.5 years, and we'll talk a little bit about a proposal to uh, either um, lay down this fund and start up a new one, or transition the COVID fund to a different sort of fund, which we're currently calling a community benevolence fund, but are open to other kinds of names. And I don't have hard copies at the meeting house to share, but I will share my screen periodically, and will read from that screen, um, uh, so so that folks in the meeting house don't have to squint to on the screen. Chip, does that sound right to you in terms of the agenda?
Yes, Jim, that sounds very good.
Okay, so
And just one other quick thing. I was talking to Mary about this. I mean, this is really timely because we actually did present at last meeting for worship with attention to business a draft of a possible change to this fund to something else. So my purpose in saying all of that is to say, yes, please tell us what you think about this. This is important stuff as we try to find the right way forward with this.
yeah, a little bit about the history of this fund. Some of the greater context is, oh, sorry, my internet connection is unstable, I'm being told, so I may cut in and out here, but one of the things that was going on in 2019, 2020, aside from a global pandemic, uh, deliberations by Friends Meeting of Austin about resources. And an ad hoc resources committee was formed and did some various reporting, and helped Peace and Social Concerns discern a way forward on how we as a meeting might help to collectively meet the need in the greater community that was becoming so acute for the pandemic. And the need that we're talking about here are really basic human needs for rent assistance, food. Uh, at start of the pandemic, people were being sent home because they were ill, or because they were exposed to someone who was ill on the road, for instance, and then they would have to stay home 2 weeks without pay. If this happens repeatedly, you can see the problem with being able to meet rent and basic human needs. We spoke at a time when there weren't a whole lot of, or when maybe it was just sort of getting started, from the city of Austin, from Texas, from the federal government, and many of the criteria for the public funds uh, excluded some of those in our community who were most at need of assistance. And I'm thinking in particular of our undocumented neighbors, or those for whom, you know, lack of English is a barrier, or those struggling uh, to um, to uh, to to figure out exactly how to navigate the bureaucracy of some of the larger social service agencies and governmental sources of funding. Um, over the course of some weeks of deliberation, we came up with some criteria for what we would, sorry, that's actually, I'm sharing the wrong screen. Let me try that again. I want to share the, um, let's see, this one. And so what I'm sharing is a proposal for COVID-19 presented to FMA meeting for worship with attention to business. And this was, I believe, in March or April of 2020. And I'm going to highlight two things, which I think are important. One of them is the criteria. We suggest that these funds be directed to where they're needed with some consideration given to the following. So that's number two. And the other thing that I'll share is some of the suggested organizations that came to mind as being organizations that we would all feel comfortable supporting. And so I'm just going to scroll down here and read that we were at the time considering organizations working directly with East Austin families of color whose wage earners have lost jobs, health care, and are suffering food insecurity. Sorry, say that again, please. Oh,
sorry.
No worries. The next criteria is that organizations who are shovel ready and are already working to alleviate the personal economic effects of the COVID crisis. The third criteria, and this is an important one, organizations who have formal policies that disavow all discrimination. Fourth, organizations that FMA has established working relationships. And finally, they should have sufficient size to have a meaningful impact on the work of a select few organizations. And with that in mind, first started this work, we were giving minimum contributions of $1,000. So we would accept donations from members and attenders of Friends Meeting of Austin, and when we had $1,000, we'd donate that. That changed over the course of the last 2.5 years, but it started out with the criteria. I'm going to scroll down now and share some of the organizations that we initially thought might be recipients. These are organizations that we know are we had been active in serving very basic human needs both before and during the pandemic. In a minute, I'll share a screen which shows where the money actually went. That this is a list here of organizations that we thought would be possible recipients of relief funds. I'm going to stop sharing now and ask if anyone wants to add anything about what sort of led us individually and collectively to set up this fund and contribute to it. If you think back, May, June 2020, this is really just the start of the hard part of the pandemic when everything was shut down. Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
Jim, I'll mention, this is Chip. I couldn't quite get the camera to zoom in as close as I wanted, but the one thing that does strike me going through that, having gone through the document and looking at where we are, and I know you'll talk this through, is that we initially were focused quite heavily, I'll say, on, in fact, maybe exclusively on organizations rather than individuals. And when you get the spreadsheet up that shows recently, we have migrated from that, and that's one of the migrations we're looking at in more of a benevolence fund type approach.
Yeah, thanks. As part of this discernment, peace and social concerns in many cases were brought information about very uh, very acute needs experienced by identified individuals. In many cases, these are individuals that were identified by organizations. And I'll just throw out one example. Casa Marianella uh, uh, brought to us as a family situation where the potential recipients were not eligible for the sort of funding that Casa Marianella is ordinarily helping people kind of get in line for. So another example is the Mennonite here in Austin, and another example is do I have his name right? Jim Wrigley of St. James Episcopal. Um, uh, that's a congregation with a kind of a community benevolence fund that is constantly giving out rental assistance and food assistance, and so we contributed uh, there as well, um, with some specific individuals in mind. Over the course of the last 2.5 years, we've contributed um, nearly $20,000. And to be clear, this is funding um, uh, is not funding that was um, from the Friends Meeting of Austin's own budget, but what we did as a meeting was encourage members and attenders to contribute to this fund, uh, but thereby those members and attenders, of course, it's a tax deductible contribution, and then the meeting itself would make the contribution forward uh, uh, in the hopes of meeting real unmet human needs in the community. Um, so um, this was all money that we raised specifically for the sake of this community need. Um, any other questions or suggestions or thoughts before I share the spreadsheet and we can talk through a little bit about where these funds went? Okay, let me share my screen then. Let's see if I can do this. Yes. Nope, that's the wrong. That's the nominating committee roster of service. Let me get the right screen up here. Okay, now I got the right spreadsheet up. Um, and what we see here is that our first contribution on May 3rd was $1,000. Donations started rolling in fairly quickly. This is about the time that people were receiving COVID relief fund checks from the federal government, and our suggestion to members and attenders was that they consider, if their own circumstances permitted it, earmarking some of those funds for the larger community. So among our initial contributions were Austin Sanctuary Network, the Workers Defense Project, which was running a program called the Texas Undocu Worker Fund, Black Women in Business, a 501c3 here in Austin, which transitioned in the very beginning of the pandemic to feeding people in East Austin. And we had a representative from Black Women in Business come to Peace and Social Concerns and tell us about that organization's work. The Austin Mennonite Church, Youth Rise Texas was running an emergency patch. assistance program. We could ML, uh, Walter Long was a member of meeting, was in touch with and knew of some needs in the community. So some monies went to him for distribution. I believe with Casa Marianella, Austin Sanctuary Network received a second check from us. And then moving into July of 2020, St. James. This is I think I said Wrigley, but is it James Harrington?
Yeah, Jim Harrington.
Jim Harrington, thank you. Um, uh, and then there were a couple situations where we gave directly to specific people who were brought to us. You see in September of 2020, a person named Lucia, for privacy purposes, we're not sharing last names. He brought to us through through Austin Sanctuary Network, couple contributions made directly to Refugee Services of Texas, which has been helping with, in particular, resettling needs, people that need assistance in an apartment or first and last month's rent, security deposit. So 2 contributions in the fall and winter of 2020/2021. And then you can see some contributions to again to Black Women in Business, again to St. James, and most recently to a woman who's needed assistance with rent. And you can see that our contributions have totaled $19,925. Currently have a $306 a balance, and Peace and Social Concerns met last Friday, 2 days ago, and we've got a recipient in mind for what remains of the fund, with the idea of spending it down to zero and then considering a transition to a new kind of structure of what the fund might look like. Are there any questions or thoughts about what you just saw, or what we've how this money has been used in the community? I'll just throw it over this before we hear about the possible transition. Well, thank you, friends. I think it's clear that meeting members and attenders have been extraordinarily generous in helping those in need during the pandemic. Again, our effort in Peace and Social Concerns was to help to distribute funds to those who might not be eligible for any other kinds of assistance. And so I think it's important to note that these funds didn't typically go to, although we considered it at the beginning, they didn't go to, for instance, the Central Texas Food Bank. They didn't go to the city fund that was accepting contributions and distributing funds. Those are very large funds, lots of sources of funding. Mostly what we were after were those who might otherwise not have access to these more mainstream sources of funding, and so uh, I mean, it's really we talked a little bit about this on Friday, and I want to lift up something that Claire shared with us, which is that the idea that really you don't you want to be careful about making distinctions between deserving and undeserving poor. They're really there are needs in our community, and those needs deserve to be met. Um, so uh, our discernment was, you know, not about who deserves it and who doesn't deserve it. It's more about who's not going to be able to get any funding out of United Way, City of Austin, federal. If you don't have a social security number, if you don't have a birth certificate, if you don't have a fixed address, um, these are some of the parts of our community that we might want to be especially cognizant of,
Yep. I don't want to
because those
interrupt you,
please do.
but you said something that I've really been thinking about, and how generous we were during this time. And I'm just talking about myself, okay, here, because I've examined that. And we've given steadily to the COVID fund. But really, have we as a meeting been truly generous? We have so much. Granted, we can't fill the need that there is here in Austin. And we should be doing that by paying our taxes. And I'm sure all of us do, and those taxes seem high to us. But actually, they don't get enough money to run the things that people need. And we're a really rich meeting. Compared to other Friends meetings, we have an immense amount of property and also a lot of money in the bank. And I'm not sure I would name myself as generous during this time. I'm not trying to guilt us. I'm just trying to think about how we should be in the times that might be coming.
It is worth just sort of emphasizing that this has been a kind of a pass-through fund. Um, so rather than kind of money from Friends Meeting of Austin's own bank accounts and assets, we raised money from Friends Meeting of Austin Committee for this purpose. So Friends Meeting of Austin it itself did not contribute to this fund, and I mean I'm not passing judgment one way or the other. It's just a fact, and so I think it's I appreciate that what you said, Liz, about not feeling like we've been generous, but there is there was a lot of outpouring of funding from the community. 5 figures at this point, almost $20,000. Could we do more individually and collectively? The answer has to be yes. And the question then is how. And Chip, I wonder if you would be willing to speak a little bit about the proposal that we brought to Meeting for Worship with Attention to Business at the beginning of September. And I'll put it on the screen if you can speak a little bit to it.
Sure, Pam. Let me say first, I think, Liz, what you said really made sense to me in the regard that I think that it's important for us to, it's important for me to reassess, am I doing all that I can? And that's maybe financially, with my time, with my knowledge, with abilities that I have that might help somebody else. I think that's, so thank you for that. Let's see, relative to this, so this was a draft that we put together, and we could read this. Would that be beneficial to everyone? It's not very long. What you see on the screen, I think, is it. There may be a little bit on the next page, but.
Yes, if you could read it, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, why don't, can those online read? We'd have to get a little closer to the TV, which we could do.
Yeah, I'm getting a little sick of my voice, but I'll read it. The Peace and Social Concerns Committee proposes a transition of the FMA COVID Fund to FMA Community Benevolent Fund. In August 2020, Friends Meeting of Austin established the COVID Fund, established using proposals outlined in the document at this link, which we looked at on screen earlier, and which I read from. As we enter our third year of supporting the fund, Friends are approaching the $20,000 level of giving. Gifts have been made to organizations we are familiar with, such as Austin Sanctuary Network and the East Austin Food Project, organized by the Black Women in Business Collective. Some individuals who have been impacted by COVID were referred to us through other organizations, such as Casa Marianella and Austin Tan Cerca de la Frontera. Friends' generosity has made a difference. The FMA COVID Fund has made a difference in our community as a means of giving funds relatively quickly to those in need. Since the establishment of the fund, conditions which may drive monetary need are broader than COVID. COVID is one of the many drivers which may challenge people in our community. Today's inflation rates, immigration policies, access to healthcare are just a few other current issues which may cause individuals or families in our community to face eviction or ability to get food or needed services. After discussion and discernment at 2 meetings, Peace and Social Concerns recommends FMA transition the COVID Fund to a community benevolence fund. The transition of the COVID Fund will require work on the part of the Finance and Stewardship Committee. The COVID Fund, as of this report, has a balance of 306. It's actually 356. Some friends recognize the continued need in our community by maintaining monthly donations to the fund. The giving of funds from the Community Benevolence Fund will be discerned by the Peace and Social Concerns Committee, as is the COVID Fund. Gifts may be given to organizations or to individuals. Peace and Social Concerns Committee will maintain a spreadsheet and report on gifts made from the Community Benevolence Fund a few times a year, typically twice, during Meeting for Worship with Attention to Business. I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, so you know, there were a lot of organizations we helped with the COVID Fund and with the transitions that we've talked about and the change. We were looking at making transitioning this to something similar to the Benevolence Fund, but not obviously for members, for our community. And I think the part that perhaps we weren't in unity over on the document that we just read was criteria. Does there need to be criteria in the document, or do we leave it to discernment by the Peace and Social Concerns Committee, or some balance therein? So that's kind of, you know, and a couple examples. I mean, we do simple meals, and that's a pretty quick way to get funds and then to needs. And I had a need that I learned from an email the other day that when I responded back, by that time, that need had been met. And so that's kind of what we were kind of looking at. I guess I was almost even picturing it perhaps akin to the Columbia Ministry Fund or the Benevolence Fund. It was more like that, but not for members.
I really think that I really rethought what we decided a couple of weeks ago, and thought we might bring to the meeting. I'm aware of our simple meal, which does raise some money from the community. Some meetings have a designated contribution group that they give to every month. And that means that the money isn't actually going through our books as a friends meeting, but rather people can write checks or give cash, and that way it goes straight to the group like we do our simple meal. That might be something, a way to meet this need for all of us wanting to contribute to a local groups, basically, that we really feel are worthy, and having I know I like the Peace and Social Concerns Committee to review those groups. That is really helpful to me as an individual. And that makes it easier for me to give because I know that that those groups meet criteria that we've set for them. So the idea would be to choose every month, to choose a group to give to, a little like we do the simple meal. Maybe it could be combined with the simple meal, and we could understand it like that, and that it wasn't just you could give other days during that month into a basket, like we do for the simple meal. So just an idea of how we could both be giving to the community on a regular basis from our own pockets, as you know, not the meetings, and therefore, you know, but do it in a way that would be helpful to everybody. I'm sure everybody also makes donations outside of what they would give through meeting, but that really would be helpful, I think. But I'm not sure I see Peace and Social Concerns deciding directly to give. And we have a lack of energy in terms of our own energy, in terms of being able to serve the community. We can't do we really haven't got enough people to do a soup kitchen, or even participate in a soup kitchen except as individuals, that kind of thing.
Thank you, Liz. I think of this sort of last 10, 15 minutes as being an opportunity for peace and front about thoughts and perspectives like what you've just shared. We meet as the second and days of the month, and so this will be on the agenda for us at our next meeting, and we'd welcome people to come then as well. But anything that anyone raises now, we will definitely bring to our discernment process. So are there other thoughts that people would like to share?
I was in a meeting online yesterday, and a parent remarked that their 3-year-old, and evidently many children 3 and under in this country, are language delayed because they have been isolated. And so one of the things this father was celebrating was that preschools were going to exist. It occurs to me that being able to pay tuition for a child to get into an environment where they get more language stimulation would be one thing to pay for.
I may have come in a little bit too late to get the exact details, but I think I heard that this was, the funds were designated for outside of the meeting. That may be what I'm hearing. The only thing I was thinking is I know that in the past few years, we have several members of this community that have been hit very hard with the financial burden of medical costs. And it has impacted their ability to do a lot of things, that have adequate food to be able to pay for a lot of things. I don't know if it's worth looking at, those individuals, but yeah, I don't want to cloud it up if it's not the right direction to go. That's not where they allocated, but I do know that those folks in the past few years have been really hit hard. Some were hit before that with that. But it'd be good to give some relief to those folks where we could.
That would fall under the meetings benevolence.
Okay, that's what we do have. That's what I thought. Okay, never mind. Scratch that.
Jim, one of the other things that has crossed my mind, and perhaps now that we're getting together in the meeting house again in greater numbers, is Trinity Center comes to mind, or someplace that accepts donations. I know, for example, I have a friend at Trinity Center that may send out on a Thursday or Friday if she has a special need for one of her clients or something. But I was thinking about either the clothing drop box or something like that we could collect and then just take the responsibility for getting that to the proper people. Or if we've done that in the past, I'd sure like to hear about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Start. And one just item real quick, I'm sorry. That's maybe material things. And then time is another thing. I mean, I know we don't have the wherewithal or the ability to ourselves do a soup kitchen type of approach, or a place for people to gather for food. But there are places like First United Methodist and other places that perhaps we could get a list if friends were so led to do that type of volunteer work. We could maybe perhaps keep a place where people could look and see, here's some opportunities for us.
I like that idea too. Yeah. I think if people are aware of volunteer opportunities, they would appreciate knowing. And then we find out how much energy the meeting has.
I have a question as well, which is whether we should reach out to Jim Harrington and ask if he'd be willing to or provide a forum on the work that he's been doing under the auspices of St. James. Because it strikes me that at least a little bit of what we're talking about is it's kind of similar to the fund that he oversees.
Just to inject this briefly into the conversation, it may not need to be said, but part of this also should include thinking about how we engage the children in doing things in the community, possibly work projects, or at least some forms of awareness of what the meeting is engaged in terms of helping the community and the world in general.
I'm going to follow up on what Terry just said. When I was a little kid, kindergarten and first grade, my family went to community congregational church, and we had a little cardboard box with a little slit in it. It looked like a UNICEF box, but it was a church box. It was in the kitchen, and we put coins in it. And that was like so cool because we were helping other people. I would point out that it's almost October, that UNICEF does still make boxes. I'm not sure how you get them.
Yeah, well, I'll let you know. Every year I check into this. They didn't last year for various reasons. Yeah, but they do holiday-centered activities, and I'm a big fan, so I will.
Me too.
I will check it out and let folks know.
When I was in second grade, third grade, fourth grade, my school did UNICEF, and we had to learn what UNICEF meant and how to say it, which was really challenging. United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, in case somebody that we went trick-or-treating to asked us, well, what is UNICEF? And then we, brought all our money and poured it out and counted it and stuff like that and donated it. It's a very pleasant memory from my childhood, and probably set the stage for me being an adult who enjoys sharing money and donating.
This is Erica. I have a suggestion for the name. The Starfish Fund. On that story of the person on the beach who is throwing starfish back into the ocean, and it makes a difference for each one.
Well, I'll just share one point of discussion that I can bring from the Finance Committee meeting where we discussed bringing the simple meal as this is another suggestion that we have a monthly designated recipient from this fund for the simple meals so that people can contribute via cash or checks, and that money just goes into the this fund at Friends Meeting Boston, and from which we write checks. Just a logistical point which would make it easier so that we don't have to send cash through the mail to our simple fund recipient organizations. And Chip, maybe we can talk at Peace and Social Concerns about kind of the logistics of that kind of thing. If there are no other thoughts, I might just suggest that that we invite you all to October 14th, Friday, October 14th, 6 p.m. Peace and Social Concerns Committee on Zoom to continue the conversation, and that maybe we'll bring a more formal proposal to Meeting for Worship with Attention to Business in November. Chip, does that sound like a good next step for this proposal?
That sounds great. Yep. Thanks everybody for contributing, and the other ideas too. And certainly come and visit us at the Peace and Social Concerns Committee. Bring your ideas and energy. All right, shall we transition?